Hello everyone, welcome to Nightmare Echo. I know most of you use this video to sleep, so relax and drift off as we begin. In the stillness of night, as rain taps against your window, these stories emerge from the shadows. 7 cases that reveal the darkest corners of humanity, 7 stories where ordinary days turned into nightmares. Tonight, we explore the cases that haunt investigators, families, and communities to this day. A trusted caregiver with a deadly secret. A student library transformed into a crime scene. A Christmas morning that ended in blood. Tonight, you'll hear 7 true stories that prove the most disturbing crimes often happen in the most ordinary places, committed by the people we'd least suspect. Make yourself comfortable as the rain falls. Our first story begins with a woman who was supposed to protect the most vulnerable, but instead became their worst nightmare. Story 1. She was a nurse, someone trained to heal, to comfort, to save lives. But behind closed doors, 4-year-old Kaylee knew her as something else entirely, a monster. Kaylee was just 4 years old when she was adopted, a bright-eyed child who loved animals and carried a stuffed bunny everywhere she went. She and her 2 sisters were taken in by a woman who seemed like the perfect mother, a registered nurse with a spacious home and a reputation for being caring and competent. The first sign something was wrong came when Kaylee's teacher noticed unusual bruising. When questioned, the nurse had a ready explanation: the child was clumsy, accident-prone. Medical professionals, after all, know exactly what to say to deflect suspicion. Then came the day of the frantic 911 call. The nurse's voice, controlled yet urgent, reporting that her daughter was unresponsive. When paramedics arrived, what they found contradicted everything they'd been told. The examining doctor later testified that Kaylee's injuries were the worst case of child abuse I've seen in 15 years of practice. Her small body bore evidence of repeated trauma, broken bones in various stages of healing, internal bleeding, and head injuries consistent with being slammed against a hard surface. But the most damning evidence? Photographs found on the nurse's phone. Images documenting Kaylee's injuries over time, stored in a hidden folder. What kind of person photographs the suffering they've inflicted? As investigators interviewed the other adopted children, a pattern emerged. They spoke of punishments administered behind locked bathroom doors, of hunger used as discipline, of watching their sister Kaylee receive the worst of the abuse. While they survived, they carried invisible scars that may never heal. In the courtroom, the nurse maintained her composure, claiming Kaylee's death was a tragic accident. But the evidence told another story, one of calculated cruelty by someone who knew exactly how much trauma a child's body could withstand before breaking. The prosecutor's closing statement silenced the courtroom. She didn't just violate her oath as a nurse. She violated the most sacred trust of all, that between a mother and her child. Today, Kaylee's sisters live with a new family. They're healing, but they still sleep with their bedroom doors open, afraid of what might happen if they're closed. And Kaylee's stuffed bunny, recovered from the scene, sits on a shelf in their new home, a reminder of the sister who never had a chance to grow up. Our next story takes us from one betrayal of trust to another, this time on a college campus where students never imagined the danger would come from someone with connections to law enforcement. Story 2. Finals week at Florida State University. The library packed with students. No one noticed the young man enter with a backpack until the first shot rang out. No one knew he was carrying his mother's service weapon, or that his mother was a sheriff's deputy sworn to protect the community. The university library at midnight. The soft clicking of keyboards, the rustle of pages turning, students hunched over textbooks preparing for exams. Security footage shows the shooter entering at 12:07 a.m., his expression blank, his movements deliberate. In his hand, a .40 caliber service weapon belonging to his mother. The first victim was sitting alone, headphones on, completely unaware until the bullet struck. Panic erupted as students realized what was happening. Some fled, others hid between bookshelves or under tables. A student later described the surreal scene: "1 minute I was studying chemistry, the next I was texting my parents goodbye." As shots continued to ring out, campus police responded with remarkable speed. Within minutes, they confronted the shooter on the library steps. When he raised his weapon, they fired. The shock came when investigators identified the shooter, the 21-year-old son of a respected sheriff's deputy from a neighboring county. His mother's service weapon, the one she was trained to use to protect citizens, had been turned against innocent students. Investigators found a journal in his apartment filled with rambling manifestos and disturbing drawings. Friends reported he had become increasingly withdrawn and paranoid in the months before the shooting. But no one, including his mother, recognized the warning signs that might have prevented the tragedy. Imagine the moment the sheriff's deputy received the call, learning not only that there had been a shooting but that her son was the shooter, and he had used her gun. In one night, she lost both her child and her sense of security in the career she had dedicated her life to. At a press conference, she appeared hollow-eyed and shaken. "I have served this community for 17 years, she said. Now I must ask for forgiveness for what my son has done." The university installed metal detectors and increased security patrols. Students who witnessed the shooting formed a support group that still meets today. And in the sheriff's department, new protocols were implemented for securing service weapons when off duty. One survivor put it simply, "I can't study in libraries anymore. I always sit facing the door." While some violence erupts in public spaces, our next story reminds us that sometimes the greatest danger lurks behind the doors of ordinary homes, even on Christmas morning. Story 3. December 25th. While children unwrapped presents and families gathered for holiday meals, one home became a crime scene. 2 lives ended violently on what should have been the most joyful day of the year. The neighborhood was decorated with twinkling lights and festive displays. Inside one home, a Christmas tree stood in the corner, presents still arranged beneath it. Down the street, neighbors heard screams that they initially mistook for children's excitement. Lisa, 34, had been dating Mark for just 8 months. Friends described her as generous and kind, the type of person who remembered everyone's birthday and always brought homemade cookies to work. Their neighbor, Robert, 41, was a father of 2 who had come over that morning to drop off Christmas gifts. Neither of them saw the violence coming. Neither had a chance to defend themselves. What investigators pieced together was chilling. Mark had been acting strange in the days leading up to Christmas. Lisa had confided in friends that she was considering ending the relationship after the holidays. That morning, when Robert came to the door with gifts, something inside Mark snapped. The 911 call came from a terrified teenage witness who had been walking by and glimpsed the attack through an open curtain. "There's blood everywhere," the caller whispered. "He's still in there with the knife." When police arrived, they found Mark sitting calmly at the kitchen table, surrounded by carnage. The Christmas music was still playing. Presents remained unopened. And Mark simply said, "I'm ready to go now." During his plea hearing, Mark offered no explanation for his actions. The families of the victims sat in stunned silence as he simply answered guilty to both counts of murder. The judge noted it was one of the most senseless crimes she had encountered in 20 years on the bench. In her victim impact statement, Lisa's mother held up a Christmas ornament, the last gift her daughter had given her. "Every Christmas will now be a reminder of what we lost," she said, her voice breaking. Robert's children now split Christmas between relatives. They're told their father died being kind, bringing gifts to a friend. Lisa's apartment was eventually cleared out by her parents, who couldn't bear to see the Christmas tree still standing months after her death. And in that neighborhood, residents say Christmas has never felt quite the same again. Our next story shows how quickly life can change, a promising future erased in seconds by a single bullet. Story 4. He had survived countless punches in the ring. He had just welcomed his first child into the world. But Antoine, the rising star boxer, never saw the bullet that ended his life, fired from a passing car on a quiet evening just 2 months after his son was born. Antoine, 28, had been boxing since he was 12. With a professional record of 15-2, scouts were calling him the next big thing. His Instagram showed a proud new father cradling his infant son, Jaden. The caption read, "Everything I do now is for this little man." Security footage from that evening shows Antoine walking to his car after training. He's on the phone, probably calling home. He never sees the dark sedan approaching. The car slows down. A window rolls down. A single shot is fired, striking Antoine in the head. The car speeds away. 18 seconds total, that's how long it took to end a life full of promise. A witness described the haunting silence afterward. 1 minute he was standing there, the next he was on the ground. There wasn't even time for him to cry out. Detectives initially suspected the shooting was connected to Antoine's rising fame, perhaps jealousy from a rival boxer. But as they dug deeper, they discovered something unexpected. Antoine had recently testified in a case against a local drug dealer. The dealer had been sentenced just 1 week before the shooting. The car was eventually found abandoned 20 miles away. Inside, a single shell casing and a burner phone with only one number in its call log. When police arrested the shooter 3 weeks later, he was preparing to flee the country. He had no personal connection to Antoine. He was simply hired to send a message to anyone who might consider testifying in the future. In custody, he showed no remorse. When asked if he knew Antoine had a newborn son, he simply shrugged and said, "Not my problem." Today, Antoine's son is being raised by his mother, who keeps a pair of her partner's boxing gloves hanging above the crib. The gym where Antoine trained established a scholarship in his name for young boxers from disadvantaged backgrounds. His coach told reporters, "In the ring, Antoine always saw the punches coming. That's what makes this so cruel, he never had a chance to defend himself." While Antoine had no opportunity to protect himself, our next story involves someone who was similarly defenseless, but the threat came from those who were supposed to ensure his safety. Story 5. Prison is meant to be punishment, not a death sentence. But for one inmate in a New York correctional facility, being handcuffed and surrounded by guards didn't mean protection. It meant he had no way to defend himself when the beating began. The incident began as a routine transfer between cell blocks. The inmate, James, 34, was serving a 5-year sentence for nonviolent drug offenses. Prison records show he had no disciplinary issues during his 18 months of incarceration. Surveillance footage shows James being led by 2 guards down a corridor. He's compliant, his hands cuffed behind his back. Then they turn a corner, entering a hallway known to be a camera blind spot. What happened in that blind spot remains disputed. The guards claim James became combative. But when James emerged on cameras again, he was being dragged, his face bloodied, barely conscious. 24 guards were present by then. A prison nurse who examined James afterward reported, his injuries were inconsistent with a fall or standard restraint procedures. Someone did this to him deliberately. The initial incident report claimed James had attempted to assault an officer and was subdued using appropriate force. Guards corroborated each other's accounts. But the autopsy told a different story. James had suffered a ruptured spleen, multiple broken ribs, and severe head trauma consistent with repeated blows, not a single fall or restraint. More damning still was a text message discovered on one guard's phone, sent hours before the incident, "This one's not making it to his new cell." The case might have ended there, another inmate death ruled as complications during restraint, if not for one guard who couldn't live with what he'd witnessed. 3 weeks after James's death, Officer Reynolds came forward with his account of what really happened. They singled him out because he'd filed complaints about missing mail, Reynolds testified. They wanted to teach him a lesson. It wasn't supposed to go that far, but once it started, no one stepped in to stop it. Prosecutors ultimately charged 17 guards with crimes ranging from assault to criminally negligent homicide. 7 others faced charges related to the cover-up. The district attorney called it a devastating abuse of power and a betrayal of the public trust. Defense attorneys argued their clients were working in a dangerous environment and acted out of self-preservation. But as one prosecutor pointed out, the only person in real danger that day was James. The case prompted a department-wide review of blind spots in surveillance systems and new regulations requiring body cameras on all officers involved in inmate transfers. James's mother, who filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the prison system, keeps a photo of her son in her living room. "He made mistakes," she told reporters. But his mistake didn't deserve a death sentence. While the prison guards betrayed their duty to protect, our next story involves an even more fundamental breach of trust, a doctor who may have violated medicine's most sacred principle: first, do no harm. Story 6. When patients check into a hospital, they place their lives in the hands of medical professionals. But in one German hospital, authorities believe at least 15 patients who sought healing instead found death, at the hands of a doctor they trusted. Dr. Klaus Müller was renowned for his bedside manner. Colleagues described him as devoted, often staying late to check on critical patients. With 30 years of experience, he was the doctor other physicians consulted when cases became complicated. The hospital where he worked served a small community where everyone knew each other. Patients considered themselves fortunate to be under Dr. Müller's care. No one suspected that his attention might have a darker purpose. The first red flag came when a nurse noticed an unusual pattern: patients under Dr. Müller's care were dying at higher rates than expected, often after showing sudden improvement. More concerning, many deaths occurred during Dr. Müller's night shifts, when fewer staff were present. When the nurse shared her concerns with administrators, she was initially dismissed. "Distinguished doctors don't kill their patients," she was told. But she began keeping her own records, documenting strange patterns in medication administration. The breakthrough came when toxicology tests on a recently deceased patient revealed lethal levels of a sedative that hadn't been prescribed. Investigators exhumed bodies of other suspicious deaths and found similar results. What emerged was a pattern spanning years: patients who had been deliberately overdosed. Police found meticulous journals in Dr. Müller's home, with entries about patients' deaths that bordered on philosophical. "Released another soul today," read one entry. "They thank me, even if they don't know it's me they should thank." When confronted, Dr. Müller offered a chilling justification: he claimed he was performing acts of mercy. "I ended suffering," he told investigators. "I gave peace to those who needed it most." But prosecutors pointed out a disturbing fact: many of his victims were recovering and likely would have been discharged. Their suffering, it seemed, existed primarily in Dr. Müller's mind. As the case unfolded, it became clear that warning signs had been present for years. Statistical anomalies in patient death rates. Missing medications. Even a few patients who had reported feeling strangely after Dr. Müller's visits, before suddenly deteriorating. "The system failed these patients," said one investigator. When a doctor is involved, people see what they expect to see: a healer, not a killer. The case sent shockwaves through the medical community. The hospital implemented new protocols for tracking medication and monitoring unexpected deaths. Families of victims formed a support group, united by their shared trauma and betrayal. One daughter of a victim expressed the unique horror of this type of crime: "When someone is murdered on the street, at least you know it was a criminal who did it. But my mother died believing she was in the safest possible hands." Our final story explores another profound betrayal of trust, this time involving someone who had once sworn to protect and serve, but instead preyed on the most vulnerable. Story 7. Parents dropping their children at daycare worry about many things: scrapes, colds, separation anxiety. They don't expect to worry about a retired police officer using the facility to commit unspeakable crimes against those who couldn't defend themselves or even understand what was happening. The Little Explorers Daycare had an excellent reputation in the community. Run by a former elementary school teacher, it boasted small class sizes and a warm, family atmosphere. Her husband, James Weems, a retired police officer, often helped around the facility, fixing toys, handling administrative tasks, sometimes watching the children when staff needed a break. Parents felt reassured by his presence. After all, who better to trust with safety than a former officer of the law? The case began to unravel when one mother noticed troubling changes in her 4-year-old daughter's behavior: nightmares, fear of going to daycare, regression in toilet training. When gently questioned, the child revealed disturbing details about special games with Mr. James. The mother immediately contacted authorities, who launched an investigation. What they discovered was devastating, evidence suggesting Weems had been abusing multiple children, using his position of authority and the cover of the daycare's daily routines. As detectives interviewed families, more victims came forward. Children who couldn't fully articulate what had happened to them nevertheless provided consistent details that confirmed investigators' worst fears. Medical examination supported their accounts. Search warrants executed on Weems's computer and phone revealed disturbing materials that further implicated him. His wife, the daycare owner, appeared genuinely shocked and devastated, cooperating fully with investigators. What made this case particularly shocking was Weems's background. As a former officer, he had once been responsible for protecting the community from predators like himself. He had even participated in community safety programs at local schools. He weaponized his reputation, one prosecutor explained during the trial. He knew exactly how to use parents' trust and his status as a former officer to gain access to victims and ensure their silence. In court, Weems showed little emotion as victims' parents delivered impact statements. One father, struggling to maintain composure, addressed him directly, "You were supposed to be one of the good guys. My child still believes police officers help people. I don't have the heart to tell him otherwise." The judge, in delivering the life sentence, noted, "You've not only harmed these children but damaged the community's trust in those who are meant to protect us." Today, the daycare building stands empty, a silent reminder of what happened there. The children involved continue to receive therapy, their young lives forever altered by someone they were taught to trust. The case prompted new legislation requiring more stringent background checks for everyone with access to child care facilities, including spouses and family members of employees. As one detective who worked the case reflected, this is why these crimes often go unreported. Who would believe a child's word against a former police officer's? In this case, thankfully, someone did. 7 stories. 7 betrayals of trust. From a nurse who harmed instead of healed, to a doctor who ended lives instead of saving them. A deputy's son who used a service weapon meant for protection to cause harm. Prison guards who became the danger. A holiday turned to horror. A promising life cut short. And children whose innocence was stolen by someone who once wore a badge. These cases remind us that darkness can hide behind the most trusted facades. Yet they also show us the resilience of those left behind, families seeking justice, communities rebuilding trust, survivors finding strength to move forward. As the rain continues to fall outside your window, remember that for every story of darkness, there are countless untold stories of light, of people who fulfill their duties with honor, who protect rather than harm, who truly deserve the trust we place in them. Sleep well, knowing that while these disturbing stories exist, they are the exceptions, not the rule. And that's what makes them worth telling. If you found these stories compelling, please subscribe for more true crime content. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and check out our playlist of similar videos for more stories that will keep you awake long after the rain has stopped.